Good evening. Let us return to last night and recall that I said that we are responsible for our demonstration or lack of demonstration. In other words, we are responsible for our lives as we find them at this moment. Now, so as not to be misunderstood, I do not mean that in the sense that it is necessarily the mistakes you have consciously made or deliberate faults or errors on your part or mine, so much as I mean ignorance, our ignorance of life, our ignorance of life principles, our acceptance, which we couldn't help, of world beliefs. At any time that the knowledge of spiritual life or spiritual law would come to us, we ourselves could make the change. Or, had we been properly taught in the beginning, we would have known how to avoid most of the discords of our experience. But regardless of the fact that most of our troubles have been due to our ignorance of life, and even some of our good fortune has been due to our ignorance. In other words, we haven't come into it through consciously bringing it about as much as we have through what the world calls luck or good fortune, circumstances, and so forth. The reason for all of this is that we were brought into a world with a material standard of life. That is where the error began. From the very beginning, we have been taught that the secret of harmony is getting, achieving, accomplishing, being a go-getter, having a strong personality, being dynamic, and knowing what we want and going after it. Whereas those very traits in some of us are responsible for our troubles, because through them we have violated spiritual law. We have not only brought in the bread that we cast upon the waters, but we've managed to capture some that belong to the other fellow. And in doing this, we violated a spiritual law that had to react upon us. In the same way, at any time that we have pushed someone aside, elbowed someone, mentally or physically, at any time that we have reached out for that which was another's, in that degree we have violated spiritual law. And we could even go a step further and say that those things for which we legally and legitimately struggled sometimes were the very things that destroyed us. And the reason is this. The spiritual truth is that we are infinite, and that all that the Father hath is already within ourselves. And therefore, any attempt to add to that, any attempt to get, any attempt to push, was itself a violation of that law. The Master says, I have meat that ye know not of, that the world knows not of. He says, I can give you living waters, waters that spring up into life eternal. He says, I am the bread, I am the wine, I am the water. All of this indicating that at this very moment and at any time, past, present, or future, we are infinite being, not by virtue of ourselves, but by virtue of the great truth that thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Son, thou art ever with me, all that I have is thine. And so you see, in order to be spiritually attuned, in order to be living in accord with the laws of God, we would have to start with the realization that all that the Father hath is embodied within us. The bread of life, staff of life, the wine of inspiration, the water of life eternal. The whole kingdom of God is established within us. And then, you see, instead of starting out in life with the idea of gaining, getting, achieving, we would reverse that, and we would start out in life with the idea of serving, giving, bestowing, sharing, cooperating. We would be living out from our withinness, always able to assure anyone and everyone that our joy is in giving, sharing, serving, bestowing, cooperating. And then our good on the human plane would be the reflex action of our giving. In other words, it would be the normal reaction to our giving. The bread that we cast on the water would come back to us. So you see that every time that we believe there is something or somebody to be achieved or gained or won, some name, some fame, some fortune, we are at that very moment in violation with the spiritual principle of life, which is givingness. Just as God. We can't be anything that God isn't if we are the offspring of God, the child of God, the Spirit of God made flesh. If we are all that, then all that God is, I am. All that the Father hath is mine. And so you see, you would be breaking that relationship as the prodigal son did. When the prodigal son had that which he called his own, even though in the first place the father gave it to him, but then he considered that it was his own, and then he went out into life and spent it, wasted it. So with us, even if we acknowledge that God is our wisdom, and God is our supply, and God is our this, that, and the other thing, and then forget it, claim it for our own, and begin to use it, what we do is use it up. Because in calling it our own, we have cut ourselves off from the source or the supply. And then we only have so much. And that's why it is said that we have only so much strength and we must conserve it. We have only so much intelligence and we mustn't draw on it too heavily, or first thing you know, we use it up. We only have so many ideas, and so by the time composers and authors and artists and sculptors get to be 40 or 50, they're all used up and washed up too. All because of the belief that what is pouring through them is really pouring from them. And it isn't true. It isn't true. In that sense, they are like the prodigal who has so much to begin with and so many years in which to use it up. But to go back to our true relationship and understand that God is the source and that there's nothing that we're spending. We're not spending strength, years, wisdom, substance, life force. We're not using up anything because we haven't anything stored up. It is all pouring through us as we call upon it from an infinite source. It is very much like gauging your water supply by how much is in the pipes in your home or in the tank on your roof, forgetting the reservoir just out of town, and forgetting that even that reservoir is filled from the never-failing source of the rains and snows that come down from the mountains. And so it is that when we believe that we are using up our intelligence, our wisdom, our strength, our vitality, our years, it is all due to that ignorant belief that we are something of ourselves, and that we must date our possessions from a date called a birth date. And using that standard, figure how close we are to 80 years and 10 when it must all be used up. Now you see, living that type of life is not a deliberate wickedness on our part. It is the result of ignorance, because we should have been taught from the beginning the lesson that the Master has given us of our relationship to God, and the fact that it is not our life that is being lived, it's God's life. It is not our strength that is being used, it is His strength. It isn't our understanding that is infinite, but His understanding is infinite. It is not that our supply is infinite, but His supply is infinite, and we are but the instruments through which God pours that to glorify Himself. God has no pleasure in your dying. Turn ye and live. Why? A corpse can't glorify God. That must be clear to you. And so it is that it is our function to live, but not to live as ailing, aging human beings, but to live in the image and likeness of God, drawing upon God for daily wisdom, daily strength, daily supply, and so forth and so on. Now, as the prodigal returned to the Father's house, so can we. At any moment of our experience, it makes no difference whether we're 9 or 90, we can begin the return to the Father's house, first of all, by relinquishing the belief that we of our own selves have anything, can do anything, or be anything, and substituting for that the understanding that all that the Father hath is mine, and I am an instrument through which it pours for the one purpose of glorifying God, not glorifying you and me. I can say this to you, that if we live to be 150 and look like 50, and have our full faculties in the possession of our wits and intelligence and strength and health, it will be no credit to you or to me. It will be God glorifying itself by means of you and me, just as God glorifies itself through the sun, the moon, the stars. The heavens declare the glory of God. The earth showeth forth his handiwork. And so we don't give credit to the stars for being beautiful, or to the sun for being bright and warm, or for the moon to be giving light. We don't give credit to the ocean for housing all those fish and pearls and substances that to this minute have not yet been revealed. If we're to give glory, we're to give glory to God that it has expressed itself in such manner. And so with us. Whatever we show forth in the way of spiritual harmony, let us take no credit for it, but realize that through us, God is showing forth his handiwork. God is glorifying itself as our form, as our wisdom, our grace, and so forth and so on. Now, in speaking last night of the Sermon on the Mount, and I repeat this for you tonight, so that you will have it clearly in mind, the Sermon on the Mount presents two ways of life. The way which ye have heard it said from old, and then the way I say unto you. There are the two ways of life. You have heard it said from on old that if someone does wrong to you, you do wrong to them. You have heard it said of old that you must love your friends and your relatives, but you can hate your enemies. You have heard that it hath been said of old that you must pray for your friends and your allies, but I say you must pray for your enemies. You must forgive. 70 times 7, you must forgive. And so you have two ways of life. And the one way is the way of the scribes and the Pharisees, which is their righteousness. And you will check, you will find that that is the way of all humans in all religious teachings on earth today, except the definite mystical religions which rarely reach human consciousness, except among those who follow the mystical way of life. Now, the I say unto you, that is the mystical way of life in which you are not the actor, the doer, the beer, in which there is a transcendental presence and power which the Master called the Father within. Now, as you study the four Gospels, and please remember to make that a part of your study this week, and I don't mean a casual reading of it, I mean a very, very serious reading and rereading of it. As you read the four Gospels, please note in how many ways the Master referred to the Father within me that doeth the works. And Paul later, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me, or I live, yet not I. Christ liveth in me. And so you'll see that this second form of life, which was supposed to be lived by the disciples and those whom the Master taught, I say unto you, is a life in which you can, we might use the term, stand still and let the salvation of the Lord be made manifest through you. The battle is not yours, but God's. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. So you must remember that the Master's teaching is not one of weakness. It is not one of letting the world do anything it wants to you, and you just take all the smacking that it wants to do to you. No, no, no. It is in which you resist not evil in the realization that the Father within you is taking care of your interests, in which you realize that this Christ which strengtheneth me, this Christ through which I can do all things, this Christ, the presence within, this transcendental presence, is right there to see that no one does it to me more than 70 times 7. That's the maximum I'm allowed. After that, he comes in, usually before that. But at least that is the worst that can happen to us. Now, at first, to us, remember, at this level of life, it does seem just what our church friends would tell us, that this way of life is an impractical one. It does seem so. It just does seem as if you weren't awake and protecting yourself every minute that something very drastic would be happening to you. But now that is based on a premise that has wrecked the entire world, and one which we are here to learn to overcome, first by knowing what the truth is. This whole idea that you must protect yourself, or that you must battle or struggle, mentally or physically or through prayer, is all based on an erroneous premise, namely that there are two powers in this world, the power of good and the power of evil. Of course, if you were to look out with your eyes, what you see, what you hear, that's all true. There are two powers. But remember, that's what got us into the trouble, was judging by appearances. And right from the start, the Master said, judge not after appearances, judge righteous judgment. And if you will judge righteous judgment by means of bearing witness not with what you see or hear, but by what spiritually unfolds from within, you will find a great miracle. There are not two powers. There is only one. There is only one power, and that isn't a power in the sense that it's doing something to something. That is only a power in the sense of its creative and maintaining sense. Let me illustrate that there must surely be something or other that created the law of like begetting like. That is, if you plant seeds of roses, you'll get roses. Chrysanthemums, you'll get chrysanthemums. Pineapple, you'll get pineapple. Peaches, you'll get peaches. Nobody can violate that law. And as a matter of fact, it has been proved by grafting how very, very exact that law is. That if you plant two things in the one, you'll get a combination of the two. In other words, it is an absolute law that like begets like. Now then, you know as well as I do that something must have brought that into existence, just as you know that something brought petroleum into the earth, and diamonds, and gold, and silver, and jade, crystal. Just as you know that something other than a salt cellar put the salt in the ocean. Just as you know that fish are in the sea and birds in the air, just so do you know that something did it. Call it God, call it the supreme intelligence of the universe, call it a principle of nature, call it mathematics. The name you give to it is of no importance. What is important is that you know it wasn't anybody named Jones, Brown, or Smith. You know definitely that there is a spirit that has given to this world its fish and minerals and all else that's in the sea, and its birds in the air, and its crops in the ground, and its trees, its hills, its valleys, suns, moons, and stars. You know that. And that we will call for the moment a creative principle, that which produced it. And now, since those things have been going on and repeating themselves for as many thousand years as we have any recorded history, we can also call it a maintaining and sustaining principle. Now, do you follow that? You have something or other which creates. And whatever it is that creates, it maintains and sustains. And so far, there has never been a power to refute or destroy any of that creative or maintaining or sustaining principle. Everything that you can think of in the way of a spiritual quality is as it was in the beginning. Everything. The sun, moon, and stars have been going on in their courses from the beginning. The tides have been rolling in and out. The law of like begetting like has been going on. 2 times 2 have always been 4, never more, never less. Any way in which you can possibly direct your thought into anything that isn't man-made, you will see for yourself very quickly that it is permanent. Now, once you see that, you will come to the agreement within yourself, not so much by reasoning, but because a power higher than a reasoning power will reveal to you that you're seeing truth, that actually you're seeing God in action as a creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle, and that there never has been and cannot be a power to refute, to overcome, to destroy, not in all these ages, any part of God's creation. So that you come really to the word God, or universal mind, or creative principle, you come to see it as a creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle, and there you begin to abide, and no longer do you reach out to God. Now here is one of the first great principles of the mystical or spiritual way of life, that you do not have to reach out to God, you do not have to tell it anything, you do not have to attempt to influence it. It won't do you any good anyhow, you can't. But you will quickly see that whatever God is, God eternally is, and that man cannot influence God to be other than God is, and so you'll quickly learn that prayer means coming into agreement with that. A high form of prayer is coming into agreement. Why, God is. God is. That's enough. God is. Why do I take responsibility for myself or another? Is this my child or God's child? Is this my world or God's world? And this whole sense of personal responsibility drops away, not all at once, unless it comes to you through revelation, and even then, even if it comes in a blinding flash, as it did to Saul of Tarsus, it may take you, as it took him, 9 years before you come into the full realization of what it means. And I can bear witness to you that regardless of how many revelations I have had, I have not been able immediately to demonstrate them. It has taken time for it to settle in my consciousness and become a demonstrable principle. I see the principle, I catch it, but it is so contrary to everything that I've ever humanly learned that it takes time to assimilate it, and takes even a little more time before it begins to flow naturally. And so you must see this. We're still now with that Sermon on the Mount, remember, and we are with the two forms of life. And right now we're on the I say unto you. Now, when the Master says, I say unto you, resist not evil, he is saying to you, the Father created this universe and maintains it and sustains it. Relax and rest. When he says unto you, I say unto you, that if they sue you, let them. It is because he is saying that we do not live on yesterday's manna. Day by day the manna falls. It makes no difference what you do with the treasure that you have laid up in your storehouse. It makes no difference how that gets wrecked. This is the day the Lord hath made, and this is the day that the Lord is maintaining and sustaining its own universe. And just as there is no provisions for birds or fish to store up supply or animals, neither is there a necessity for us. That's no encouragement to waste it. But it is encouragement to stop fearing about this thing called supply or tomorrow or the future, and rest in this I say unto you. Now this I say unto you is a complete assurance that God is the creative and maintaining and sustaining principle, and therefore we are to abide in that word. Let that word abide in us. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Be still and know. All of these things point to why the Master could say, I say unto you, don't live by the weapons of this world, whether the physical weapons or the mental weapons, but stand still. Be still. Oh, be active, certainly. Each one of us has a work to do, whether it's housekeeping or business, healing or what it may be, and we have to be active as many hours a day as we can demonstrate our oneness with God, that is, our restfulness and strength. But let us do it without any anxiety, as if the responsibility were on our shoulder, or as if there was something that we have to think in order to make this thing come true. The proof of all this, in my experience, is the years of healing work in which I have been able to witness, from my own work and that of other students, that the healings took place not by what we knew and not by how much effort we made, but by what degree of inner peace we could attain. In other words, our struggle was not to think something or do something. Our struggle was in attaining the ability to overcome thinking and doing and learn to be still inside. I remember in the very first months of my healing work that on one of the occasions when I was having a little talk with God, I agreed that I would never refuse any call for help that came to me, regardless of where it came from or who from or what the circumstances were or what amount of work or labor or anything else was involved in it, that I would consider every call made upon me as if it were a call coming from God. And so it wasn't long before I was being called out to visit the homes of patients who could not leave their beds or their homes. And you know that within a very few years, it took one whole day in the week of driving with a car, and then it took very nearly a second day, and in those 2 days I was driving over 250 miles every week, just calling on patients who couldn't leave their homes. And one day it dawned on me, why should that be necessary? What would you be doing there in the flesh that you couldn't be doing there in the spirit? Is there really a demand on you for that? What would be the end of all this if you started making calls and found that it took 7 days a week and then got more calls and there were no more days? I thought, that's it. I am taking on myself unnecessary human tasks. I can still assume the spiritual activity, not the human. And gradually, I cut down on those calls until I imagine that in the last 10 years I haven't made 10 calls. Not in 10 years have I made 10 calls. And the reason is, there is very little reason for making a call. There might be one if, for instance, one of our very earnest students found themselves in some kind of a difficulty and needed the assurance that we were all standing by and carrying through with them. That might be, as you might say, a matter of love. Not that it would be necessary for bringing out the healing, but it might be a sufferer to be so now. But ordinarily speaking, there's very little call for those calls, because the body that we go round in doesn't do any healing work, and the mind that carries the body around doesn't do any healing work, and the spirit is wherever we may be at any given moment. And I have learned this. If I will sit, and it makes no difference what part of the world I'm in, if I will sit until I achieve that inner peace, that inner grace, and wait, just wait for an inner assurance that God is on the field, the cases are met. And that's all it takes. I am not a healer, and you never will be. Even God isn't a healer in the sense of really healing anyone. But the principle is this: where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You cannot have the presence of God and a discord. They won't go together. There's no room for it. Now, we talk about the omnipresence of God, and God fills all space. And that makes a lot of nice emotional poetry and religious fanaticism. But as a matter of fact, God is where God is realized. That's where God is. And that is why you could go to Jesus, and with the depth of his realization of God's presence, you could have an instantaneous healing. And that's why you come to us today, and it may take a day, or it might take a month, or it might take a year. The difference is in the degree of God realization. That's where the difference comes in the healing work. That's why it is that some are very fine healers. It is because they live and move and have their being in God consciousness, and they do not allow themselves to be brought down from that high level of spiritual awareness. There are others who, as we do in this activity, in order to bring some of this light to students, we have to come down into the world, and we are not always on the mountaintop where we should be for the very best results in healing work. Those who have less to do with teaching, less to do with lecturing, less to do with traveling, should be the better healers, because they can abide at home and live and move and have their being in spiritual consciousness. They can rest in their books, in their scripture, in their meditation. They can abide in the secret place of the Most High and not be pulled out. And for the rest of us who must travel and teach, it becomes a double duty on our shoulder to find hours and hours and hours when we can be alone, and establishing ourselves and maintaining ourselves in that state of consciousness, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, where the consciousness of God's presence is, there are no discords. There are no other powers. No powers of heredity, no powers of sin, no powers of disease, no powers of lack, no powers of war. You could be right on the front battle lines, and no evil would come nigh thy dwelling place, if so be you were abiding in the Spirit of God. And you are only abiding in the Spirit of God when you have one power. We're back again in that Sermon on the Mount. Why could the Master say, resist not evil? Because there is but one power, and you are never going to be called upon to refute or fight another power. If you will abide in spiritual wisdom, you will never be troubled by truth over error, or God over Satan, or the immortal over the mortal. Never, because these things will not come nigh your dwelling place. You will be living in the oneness of one. God is, and because God is, nothing else is. Now, you are in the I say unto you. When you recognize God as the one presence and the one power, and abide in it, and every time that error comes to your awareness, you are alert and say, you can't fool me, there are not two powers. I won't fight you, I won't rebel against you, I won't refute you, I won't punish you, I won't even pray to get rid of you. I stand fast Resist not evil. Why? God is a creative principle. God is a maintaining and sustaining principle. But since God is infinite, there is no other principle. Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, you are given your human life as you've heretofore known it, and you are given the spiritual life as you may attain it if you follow the Christ, if you follow the teaching of spiritual living. And do not, above all things, do not say it isn't practical in this modern age, because it is the most practical thing there is. Not only that, not only the most practical, it's the only practical thing, because it's coming into a life lived by a spiritual principle, and that spiritual principle is God. Infinite, eternal, universal, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient God. And when you're living in God, you're living safely where no evil can come nigh thy dwelling place. But don't think you're living in God if you're thinking of God as a great power that's going to do something for you, or that God is going to do something to error. God isn't going to do a thing to error. Error is going right on for the rest of all time until individual being makes the transition from having two powers to one power, until every individual comes to that place in consciousness where they understand beyond question of doubt that God is the only power. We can see the signs of the times coming around to that right now in our world affairs. It isn't too many years ago that the only way of settling national questions was by war. There was no other known way. A few tried it by conference, but it didn't work, because in the background was always, well, in the last analysis, we can call out the Army and Navy. But you see, since this nuclear fission, where everybody realizes that there could never be another war which civilization could survive, the way had to come to those in responsible positions: is there not some other way than throwing bombs? And so we have come to the place where you find us today, where we censure even our own allies if they resort to anything but the conference table, where we will not have patience or will not support even our allies if they attempt, regardless of how much reason they believe they have, regardless of how much right seems to be with them. It is not to be tolerated that they resort to force, even if temporarily they lose by virtue of not resorting to force. And that is the first step toward what we are leading to. We've gone beyond that, because we've gone beyond conferences and we've gone beyond lawsuits. We have gone to the place of the recognition of, I say unto you, thou couldst have no power over me except it be given thee of God. That is the one power. That is the place of the Sermon on the Mount, and that is the whole basic structure of the message of the infinite way. That is what it was primarily based on. That is what brought the infinite way into existence as a teaching, instead of allowing it to rest with one of the other metaphysical teachings. The fact that in my practice years and years and years ago, before ever the infinite way was dreamed of, I saw that the solution of all human problems, physical, mental, moral, financial, human relationships, every single bit of it rested on the ability not to fight back, rested on the ability not to fight error, rested on the ability to rest in the one power. And that has been the basis ever since we began, which many people do not grasp, but which they would more readily grasp if they studied more the chapters on the nature of error. The nature of error in our writings really tells you this secret, because it reveals to you the nature of what you are, if we can use the word, battling with. What it is that's disturbing you. When you see its nature, you will no longer battle it, for you will see it for what it actually is. Not what it appears to be or claims to be, but what it actually is. Now, that is why in our work, in healing, we never need to know the name of a patient. We never need to know what it is they need help for. We don't care whether it's a physical claim, mental, moral, or financial. It makes no difference to us. We don't care whether it's male or female, or whether it's animal or bird. Absolutely no difference to us. Why? We know the nature of what we're facing, and we are not facing an erroneous man or woman, and we're not facing an erroneous condition. We know definitely that we're facing a state of universal hypnotism that is presenting to us an appearance of humans or mortals, and we've learned there are no such thing. We are divine being. It is only to our human sight and sense that we appear to be humans, but as soon as you get back inside of yourself and attain the smallest measure of spiritual understanding, you will know that you never see anybody when you're looking at them. You are seeing only their body. In order to become aware of those who are in front of you, you have to look right through their eyes. And way, way back of their eyes, you'll see them, their true identity, the reality of them. And the strange thing is they all have the same name. Back there, they all lose these names that we use out in front, like Hamlet, and The Merchant of Venice, and Othello. No, we go all the way back and we find the name of Shakespeare. But with us, we go back and find the name is God. God is the name of everybody in this world. But each one wears a mask, and it's called Jones and Brown and Smith and Bill and James and Joseph. But if you look back far enough, you'll find that these are just characters in God consciousness. God consciousness itself produced out here as form. And so you'll never be fooled into believing that one person has a character different than another, or a life different than another, or a degree of health or wealth or finance different than another. You will know that God is the central theme of individual being. God is all there is constituting individual you and me. Then, when you see that nothing but a world hypnotism makes this appearance, you will no longer fight it, for you will understand then that no hypnotist yet has ever produced anything but a picture, an image. And so it is, this world mesmerism has never yet created man, woman, or child, has never created sin or disease, only an illusory picture to which we give those names. And so, in our handling of individual problems, we're not dealing with some specific problem of yours, because, you know, if we could meet 99 of your problems, that it wouldn't take you but a week to develop 110 more. You just about clear out one sin or disease to make room for 7. The Master saw that. If all you're doing is removing individual problems. But what you do is remove that world hypnotism from the individual, and you free them into their true identity. And you know why then God is one, and God is life, and God is immortal being, and that's why we're told you'll have a new name in that day. A new name will be written in your forehead. It's a 3-letter word. Or you can divide up the 3 letters into 2 words and call it I am, which is the truth. I really am. Not I was and not I will be. I am at this very moment, and you can see it. And I can see that you am also. And as you realize that I am, that I aming becomes a state of continuity, an eternal ising or aming. The hypnotism disappears. Now, we have a few questions here. And the first is, are there many spiritual beings or one? And that's just been answered. There is only one infinite spiritual being appearing individually as you or me. Is the primal cause mind? No, the primal cause is not mind. No, mind is an instrument like the body is an instrument. We say that the primal cause is mind merely, probably, I should say, merely to avoid creating another metaphysical dictionary. It has so long been accepted that when you put a capital M on mind, that you mean God, that we really go along with that, but it doesn't really mean that. There is not a capital M mind and a small m mind, and surely you know that. There can't be 2 minds. There's only one mind, and that's not God. God is the soul of man, the spirit of man, and just as spirit and soul has what we call embodiment or body, so it has a mind through which it functions. And if you learn to become receptive in your mind, use your mind as an instrument of yours, you will find that through your mind you will receive the impartations from your soul. Just as a musician will receive impartations of music, and the poet will receive his ideas of poetry, and the sculptor and the painter will receive ideas, the mind will bring them into his focus, and then the hands will carry out the work. But the soul is the source. Mind is just an instrument through which we go back to the soul. And then, is it your conviction that smoking and alcohol in whatever moderate usage constitute a barrier to receptivity or spiritual progress? Well, my actual experience has been this, that spiritual progress eliminates the drinking and the smoking, whereas repressing that moderate use of alcohol doesn't act in any way to enhance spiritual power. If it did, then all the good people in the world who don't smoke and don't drink would all be very instantly candidates to be spiritual beings, but that isn't true. There are loads of people in the world who never saw or heard of smoke or drink, and there isn't a trace of spirituality about them. No, it is the other way around. The question could be extended further. Will it help to give up meat to make you more spiritual, and so forth and so on? No, of course not. As you become spiritual, you will eat less of meat until the day comes when you will eat no meat. But it is your spirituality that brings that about. Giving up the eating of meat won't make you spiritual. There have been too many people try that way, and it hasn't worked. You might just as well say, if you sit in prayer all day, will that make you spiritual? No. But as you become spiritual, you'll find yourself sitting more and more in prayer. There's only one thing we really can do toward developing our spirituality. Acknowledge, first of all, that if you're on the spiritual path, you're not there because of any quality of yourself. It is because a little of God has touched us and put us on this beam, and we can't do other than we're doing. That's number one. Then number two, up to the capacity that is given us, let us give our time to the reading, studying, and meditating. Don't try to force it by saying, I'm determined to spend 4 hours a day at it, but gradually increase your capacity until you're at 4 or 8. That is an individual thing that only you can determine. On the other hand, do not let this world mesmerism, which sometimes appears as laziness, indifference, get to you and keep you from that which you know is your function. Fortunately, you have been given a conscience, and you'll know right well when you're not doing all that you should be doing to enhance your spirituality. And the last is, what is your definition of soul? And there is no such thing as a definition of soul. If you could define soul, you would define God. If you could define God, you would find that an effect was God instead of cause. Remember that anything you can know with your mind is an effect. That's why you can never know God with your mind. God is not an effect. God is cause. And therefore, God can reveal itself through you, but you never will be able to limit God to the extent of being able to define it or analyze it or project it in any way. We can, through a silent communion, attain a degree of conscious oneness with God so that those who are meditating with us can become aware of God, some in a minor degree and some in greater degree. But if we were to try to project it with our minds, it would fail. It is the ability, there again, I say unto you, don't try to project thought to anybody, but sit still and let God flow out through. Now, when anyone is in meditation and any conscious thought is in their mind, especially any conscious thought of imparting truth to you, they must inevitably fail.